I was thinking about what to talk about, and I thought the timing of it being Halloween would be perfect. And like Amy had mentioned, I'm enjoying and really grateful today. We've got wonderful weather here in the north suburbs, and I am expecting hopefully lots of children um, coming by to get lots of candy. We went out actually last night to buy extra candy because I'm a little worried that we're just going to have this onslaught of children because last year our community did not do trick-or-treating because of the pandemic. Um, so I've actually been thinking a lot about death and what it means to prepare and be comfortable with death. I love fall. I'm a fall baby, and there's something about just this time of the year as we anticipate the changes of the colors of the leaves, and knowing that that is a signal to things going dormant and some things dying. And if you suffer from seasonal allergies, you may be like me, you're waiting for the hard frost for everything to die so that you no longer are struggling with those seasonal allergies. But I've also been thinking a lot more about death in part because my husband and I finally got around to doing a very grown-up thing. We are getting our estate planning done and having all of the I's dotted and T's crossed, and in the process have had to talk with our adult children about plans and things that we would like and things that we are anticipating in our death. One of the funny stories around that was realizing because of uh, our two younger boys are in college, and then our oldest has graduated and is living on her own out in New York. None of them are married, and we realized that because they are adults, we wouldn't have access to their health information if they took ill. And so we had papers sent and prepared for them for medical power of attorney. And just a funny story, our daughter, when she got on the Zoom call with the attorney asked, so do you understand why we're here today and the papers that you are going to sign? And she said, I think so. These are the papers that I'm signing so that when I have to decide to pull the plug on my parents, I can pull the plug. We were all like, no. um, and uh, and then our youngest actually, when he found out that we were getting our estate settled, he called us up right away and he said, does this mean that there's money that you're leaving us? And so we realized that our kids are actually not afraid of our death. They are probably more prepared than we thought they were. But in all seriousness, it was a great opportunity to talk about death with them and then with my parents. My parents are 75 and 81, and they spend a lot of time talking about how their friends are all passing away and what they would like to see in their death. One of the things that I've realized that here in the US, there is this strange preoccupation with the violence leading to death, but not a comfort around death. And then in the last year and a half, the current count is about at 745,000 souls, people who have died due to COVID. And there is this kind of distance from that unless you have had somebody you know and love die from COVID. I personally live less than a mile away from a hospital and one of the only trauma centers in the area. And I remember when they moved in that trailer, the refrigerated trailer, and walking by it once we all felt a little more comfortable to be outside and walking and taking my kind of daily walk past that area and taking a moment of pause to think about what was happening in our world. US traditions around death kind of separate us from that. I think there's more of a move in the last few years with palliative care and hospice care to bring that experience back into a more intimate space and into our homes. But by and large, people experience death as something that happens in a hospital or somewhere away from where we are living. Even the services are not at home, and bodies are prepared by professionals. And when you have an open casket funeral experience, you're not supposed to touch the body. You're supposed to kind of stay, and there is a reverence and a distance between what happens to us as living bodies and in death. And I have been thinking about this in part because of the differences around how I've experienced death. My mother-in-law passed away in the hospital, and my husband had the privilege of sitting beside her and being there for her last breaths. And then when my grandmother passed away, my sister, my mom, and my oldest aunt were all there with my grandmother in her nursing room, not knowing actually that she would pass while we were there, but we were there by her bedside, all holding her hands. And I was trying to convince my mom and aunt to go and get some rest because they had been holding vigil by her bed, telling them to go home and shower. And in that moment, we realized that my grandmother was getting ready to take her final breaths. And so in a world where many of us experience death as something apart from us, I've been thinking about what it means to prepare well and what lessons that we can learn in death. I know that in some places, some schools are teaching around Halloween the traditions of the folks with Mexican heritage, Dia de los Muertos, Day of the Dead, kind of commemorating the dead with altars and food and drink, visiting graves, and building home altars. And for me, as a Korean American, what we would do is build a home altar at the moment that we heard of someone's death, to have a photograph, to have candles, to have rice. For homes that still celebrated kind of the traditional rites, there would be incense and this sense of not just mourning, but celebrating. So I do think it's kind of interesting that on Halloween, that's really not what is taught around the celebration. What's really emphasized is the dressing up of costumes and the trick-or-treating, which growing up, my parents just thought was a strange tradition to like knock on the doors of strangers and then take candy from strangers. But we have fully adopted that, and I can't wait to be out there in my costume. But even in that is kind of this ongoing conversation around what is appropriate costuming for children and the violence around some of the costumes that kids are wearing. So I wanted to kind of circle back and invite us to think about what are the lessons that we learn in folks who not only have prepared well for their own deaths, but what we've learned as folks who may or may not have seen people not prepare well. I have a loving relationship, but also a complicated relationship with my parents. And one of the things that I have laughed about with my mom is she wants to know how much we love her now. She doesn't want to know when she's dead. And one of the things that she has always said is, don't wait for the funeral to send me flowers. I will be dead and cannot appreciate the flowers. Send me the flowers now. And so I often think about the beautiful eulogies that I have heard and have been invited to be a part of. And I think about the words that are shared and wonder, have we shared those words when our friends and family people are alive? So I want to invite us to think about ways in which we can send each other those flowers now, to appreciate those gifts now, and to send those words of affirmation and love and appreciation now, instead of waiting for death to be the impetus for that encouragement. The other thing that I want us to think about are ways to celebrate one another while we are alive. I loved the acknowledgement and the candle lit for wedding anniversaries and for a sister that you love and get along with. Those are exactly the examples and things that I would say that we need to do more of. I don't know about you, but this last 18 months in pandemic has been interesting. And there have been a lot of opportunities to celebrate in person that have been lost. Last year was a big one for us. So last year we had a child graduate from high school. We had my 50th birthday. We had my dad's 80th birthday. We had a family trip planned. And I'm sure all of you had similar experiences where things were lost that we could not celebrate in person. But Chuck and I, we were talking a little bit before the service of ways in which we learn to be creative. And so how can we take the forced creativity of COVID and pandemic and continue that further into our daily lives? What are the ways in which we can celebrate one another that don't always require flying in and being physically present? One of the big things that my children learned was mail. Physical mail. So my kids are 20, 22, and 25. And it's pretty hilarious. None of them have checkbooks. They don't write paper checks on a daily basis, and they don't have stamps. I don't think they have envelopes either. But in a time of being separated, I took to writing notes and sending cards so that there would be a physical reminder, handwritten, so that they could touch something that I had touched. And so what are the ways in which we can take the lessons that we've learned from physical separation to bring about a different kind of physical closeness? What can we celebrate that isn't on the usual calendar aside from anniversaries and birthdays? The big things and the little things that we can celebrate so that we, while we are living, are also living fully into the healing and the loving that we can give and experience together. I love some of the traditions that we have in Korean culture. One of them is to celebrate the 100th day of a baby's life. 100 days because back in the olden days, as my mom would say, for a baby to make it to 100 days would mean that they had the strength and the family had the resources needed, and that this baby would most likely survive beyond their 100 days, that there were so many babies lost in those first 100 days that they would celebrate. And when we had our first child, I thought, gosh, this is such a strange extravagance to like have a cake and food that this baby actually can't enjoy. But it was an excuse for families also now in modern day and present day to get together and celebrate what once was lost and was once so unusual, to celebrate kind of the bounty and the resources that we have in current day. So what are the ways in which you can bring about those small celebrations in your family and in your community and even in your church life? What are the small things that we take for granted now in 2021 that maybe wasn't something you could take for granted even in the early 1900s, which sounds a long time ago, but actually really isn't that long ago. I love also the tradition of celebrating milestone birthdays, but also those milestone birthdays being a reason for extended family and friends to get together. So again, in the Korean tradition, we celebrate the first birthday. It's huge. And so nowadays I've seen friends, of course, not because of COVID, we can't do it, but beforehand, first birthdays almost becoming like small weddings. And again, I used to think this is ridiculous and a silly use of money and resources. But what a wonderful way to get together and celebrate a family and celebrate one another and acknowledge once again that these things that we take for granted for a child to live to one, not long ago was an unusual feat for a family. So don't wait for the funeral to send flowers. Don't save your words for a eulogy. Don't wait for death to celebrate. And I think the last thing that I have drawn is, what does it mean to forgive yourself and to forgive others? I think about this a lot because of I have a lot of complicated relationships now that I think about it. I had a very complicated relationship with my mother-in-law. She, on her deathbed, had summoned those of us who were around. And when I went in to say goodbye, she had a few words for me. One was that she was grateful that I kept a clean house. And she asked me to take care and make sure that her second child, my husband's younger brother, would be okay. I was stunned and could not understand, and for years and years was really quite angry in that she would ask me to take care of her grown son, who at that point was also married again and had a child. But in the years to come, I realized that that actually was a big ask for her. That she had some deep concerns about her son and her baby, and that she would trust me with that. And I realized in that process of figuring out why she had said the words she had said to me, had to take a long time to forgive her, and wishing that I had had the opportunity and had done the work really to understand why she was asking me to do the things that she had asked me to do, even when she was alive. And to give that space, not only to her, but to myself. When I was not forgiving, I allowed that anger and frustration to occupy rent-free a lot of energy and space in my mind and in my heart. And so what I realized in processing years of good therapy, forgiving yourself and forgiving others releases you from allowing those things and those people to occupy space rent-free in your life. And to live into that freedom, those words that we spoke at the beginning, what does it mean to live fully in freedom? What does it look like to give an opportunity for others to live in that freedom as we offer forgiveness, not only of others, but of ourselves? And so I wanted us to give a chance to think about that. What does it look like? And what does it mean for you individually and collectively to not be afraid of death and to learn what it means to live well as we see others passing into death? For me, it has been realizing there was a lot of calm and peace as my grandmother passed, because she had made her peace with her children and with herself, and with the higher power that she believed in. I saw the lack of peace that my mother-in-law experienced because she had held on to things that she didn't need to hold on to. I learned as I'm watching my parents prepare and anticipate their own death, what it means to hold things lightly and then also to tell the stories that are important to them, to give away the things that are meaningful to them and to share the stories of why this plate that I never saw them use ever, 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 why they saved it, what it meant to them, and what they hoped it would mean to me as they gave me these plates that I saw stored away. I literally never saw them use. What can we learn from the lessons even of the earth around us? What are the things that need to simply go dormant and that we can trust, as in the conversation before service started, trusting that the roots are going down deep, even though we don't see anything on the surface, and trusting that certain things need to die. I'm really hoping all the weeds just die. They usually don't. They're usually the ones that always spring up. But what can we learn from kind of the ebb and flow of Mother Nature? What in ourselves are the things that we in this season can leave dormant and be okay, and trust that maybe after a harsh winter might emerge again in the spring. So my invitation to all of us is to think lightly about death and to think fully about life. How can we live fully into this time, knowing that we have an opportunity to love fully, to forgive fully, to appreciate one another fully, while we have the words and maybe even the flowers.
Thank you so much. Let's take a moment to reflect, and I will share a song here by one of my heroes. Let me get it set up here. Oh, hang on, that's not what I wanted. Okay.
To my old brown earth and to my old blue sky, I'll now give these last few molecules of I. And you who sing, and you who stand nearby, I do charge you not to cry. Guard well our human chain, watch well you keep it strong, as long as sun will shine, and this our home keep pure and sweet and green. For now I'm yours, and you are also mine.
I love that song. I really like how it turns the perspective around. Most songs about death are about from the point of view of the survivors and the loss that they feel. And I love the generosity that Pete has for the earth and the rest of us. So,
We lost Kathy.
oh no. Wonder what happened.
You mean Kathy Gwendolyn?
No,
The
I
speaker.
see.
our guest speaker.
Oh, sorry. You're right.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Well, if she doesn't sign back in, I asked her if she would be okay with reflections and congregational engagement, and she said she was, but maybe she had an issue with technology or whatever. But anyway, we can continue to share our thoughts, those of you that have some.
Well, I can start, Chuck. I guess I've had the honor to be with a number of people at the end of their life, including all five of my siblings and my parents. And I also had the privilege of working in hospice with many wonderful social workers, nurses, chaplains, music therapists, aides. I mean, I learned so much from them. So I've met with all four of my children a number of times to talk about my end of life. And my son Jesse one time kiddingly said, "Here we go, Mom's going to talk about death again." But they are grateful, and they've thanked me for planning ahead, writing things down, talking to them. And so I'm a very strong advocate for everybody to do their estate planning and talk to their family. I know it's not easy.
Thank you, Peg.
Yep.
So Kathy's back with us, dropped out for a moment, but we can take reflections from anybody present. Yeah, Amy.
Kathy, thank you so much for your thoughtful presentation. It really spoke to my heart a lot and soul, I guess, too. It just made me think about my mom, our mom, Susan, mine. When you talked about a number of things, first of all, preparing, how she prepared, and how graceful she was in dying. She showed us a lot of grace. And I don't think we even realized it at the time, and everything she was going through about about 8 months that she was battling the cancer that took her life. But she really did do a good job. And she made some asks as well on her deathbed for us to care for various siblings, to care for fellow siblings that really need our help. She was specific about that in some cases, and she was right, of course. And then the other thing that really struck me when you talked about home altars, my sisters and I all had created altars, and we didn't realize it until later. We were speaking to each other months after my mom was gone. We had all created our own altars, and it was just lovely to sort of realize that and how important that is in memory of a loved one.
Isn't that interesting how that urge to create a space, like a physical reminder, was there for each one of you without talking about it?
Well, I think I'll follow up on my sister's story and talk about writing. That you talked about writing. That was so comical in a way to the way you presented how they don't even have envelopes. But I thought of my mom too because she wrote a little note to me. I'm not sure when she did it, but she wrote a story about how when I was born, how much she just treasured me, and she took me in her bedroom and she laid me down on the bed and laid next to me and stared at me every little movement I made, and just that it was just wonderful to have that little piece of her and story that I remembered I had heard at some point in my life, but then it confirmed it that was an actual memory. So I thought of that when you were talking about writing. Thank you.
I recall years ago, I hope I'm not jumping in with
That's fine.
somebody else. But I recall years ago working at a company where there was a woman who chose to retire, and they had a retirement party for her. She was actually kind of moving on to another job. She'd gotten quite frustrated with some of the things going on there. But she said afterwards, she said it was very interesting to see all the wonderful things people had to say about her that she had no clue of. She'd been working there for like 30, 40 years. And she said she had no idea that people had, these ideas or these thoughts about her. And here she'd been so frustrated that she was moving on to a different position and a different job. And she just said, wow, if I would have known this, I would have moved on a long time ago to hear all these wonderful things about myself. And I thought, how is this not similar kind of to life and death and funerals and that sort of thing, that when there were some family stories, for example, and they were talking about how there was a relative of mine, an elderly relative that honestly I didn't know very well, but they got together, and a lot of family members got together, and they said it was actually one of the most wonderful gatherings because a lot of people were able to talk about things that they hadn't talked about for forever. And because this relative, who again I didn't know very well, so I wasn't personally affected by it so much, but they said because this woman was older, it was kind of anticipated and expected that she would pass away, so that it wasn't the same kind of sadness as there might have been about a younger passing. And so the memorial service was much more, it had a different tone to it and a different, a more of a celebratory family gathering type thing of tone to it, as opposed to some other funerals. There were some tragic deaths in the family, a teenager and a toddler, for example, that passed away. And so this particular funeral was a very different vibe, I guess, to put it that way. So that's just one of the things. And also, I think maybe a lot of us have thought a lot about more about death during the pandemic, just because we've had number one, more time to consider some things, and number two, some of these topics have been more present. And I don't know if some of you are familiar with this book, but From Here to Eternity is a book by Caitlin Doty or Dottie. I'm not sure how you would pronounce her last name, but it's a book that I've listened to in the past year. She's actually a mortician and talks about funeral services, for example, in the United States versus in other countries and some of the practices. I thought it was going to be more about dying itself, but it's a lot about like the different customs and traditions and beliefs and the way that people mourn, which was for me a very interesting thing to listen to.
Yeah. One thing, Kathy, you talked about that struck a chord with me about I want the flowers now, and I don't know if how much my mom appreciated flowers, but we did have a family gathering when she was getting on in years. That it was probably the most insistent that she ever got was she says, I want everybody to get together while I'm here to enjoy it. So, um, and that was a special weekend that we had.
A few years ago. Oh, so
go ahead,
go ahead.
Kathy.
I was just going to say quickly, a few years ago, my mom pretty much demanded that we all take a vacation together. It's just my sister and I, at the time she was married, and then between the two of us, we had produced 7 grandchildren. And just the things we had to do to get everyone's schedule aligned so that we could take a trip together. I think I was kind of like, seriously. But my mom still talks about that and has dreams of doing it again. And I'm like, it's going to be even harder. Like the kids are graduating from college, they're working, they don't have vacation time. And she's like, no, we're going to make this happen. And I think there is a little bit of that, like, oh, okay, we will make it happen.
I was just gonna say, send flowers now. Are you familiar with this Tanya Tucker song, Kathy? Have you heard of this song?
Not. No.
I love it so much. I've been meaning to cover it, but it's exactly your sentiment, and I'm such a fan of hers. And my partner and I have pretty much since we've been together for the last couple of years, pretty much every week taking turns getting flowers. So here's mine right now.
Yay.
They're really beautiful and autumnal. Yeah, I really appreciate that sentiment. Thanks for sharing.
Mm-hmm.
I knew there was a country song that had that, I want the flowers now, and I couldn't remember who it was. So thanks for sharing that.
I want to also echo that this was a very timely message for all the reasons that you shared, but also coming up this Wednesday, like I said, is my parents' and dad and stepmom's anniversary. And we're celebrating it on, I said Wednesday, it's the 4th, which is Thursday actually, isn't it? Anyway, on Friday, we're having a family get together where all the grandkids are going to be there. And there's actually 2 great grandchildren or 1? I've lost count. 1.5, because the other one's not born yet. She's coming in December. But anyway, I've been asked to give a toast at this. And so your words today have inspired me to try to say, but not to, I don't know. I want to share with everybody my thoughts about my dad and stepmom before they leave this earth. So thank you.
One thing that I always marvel at, and I don't have any direct experience at, I've only seen short clips of video or whatever, so I don't know it. I'd like to learn more about it, but it's the New Orleans Funeral March, and it's very, from what I understand, it's very somber, going to the gravesite and with this brass music playing, and then leaving the gravesite, then it all of a sudden is very exuberant and joyful, and I always really, it really moves me when I see that. But music always gets to me. You could sing the phone book to me and I'd probably cry.
That's so true, Chuck, about music for sure. And I know what you mean about the New Orleans, the tradition of those marches there. I've seen those too. They're wonderful. I just wanted to say one more thing, if I could. When Kathy, when you talked about being at the bedside or being with the person, throughout their sort of their last days and sort of the vigil that takes place. Uh, it's interesting how people will hang on. They'll wait for people. They'll wait for a loved one that they know is going to show up, or they'll hang on because they know their loved ones don't want them to go. So it's sort of this push pull. You want to say goodbye. You want to say I love you. You want to be there, but you also, I think, need to, when they're ready, let the person know that it's okay for them to go. So kind of that idea of letting a person go. And I forget if there was a book I was reading where they talked about how it wasn't until the loved ones left the room and they went for a coffee break or whatever it was, that the person passed away.
Yeah, yeah. When I think about my grandmother, and how we were all there with her, we did in the days following joke that she knew that her daughters were finally leaving her bedside, and kind of this like, would you just let me go? And that it was her two oldest granddaughters saying, like, Mom, Auntie, go get some rest. You don't need to do this. We'll be here. We can do this too. We also joked that, of course, it was the women who were there. Um, but but again, I think there's this strange discomfort here in the West with the physicality of death, which requires as much presence as it does in life, and the distance that we put in that, and learning, as my parents have talked about what their wishes are, to be able to laugh about that, and to talk about things even with our kids, and kind of the options that are available. Like, I've said, I want to be cremated, and maybe, my mom said she wanted to be cremated and then made her ashes pressed into diamonds, into gemstones, so that she could split herself between me and my sister. And then my sister and I were like, so that you're literally always with us? Oh my God, no. But I think in those moments of understanding, how will we be more comfortable when the time actually comes that we've been able to laugh in the presence of one another, knowing that eventually death will happen. Um, and of course, in that, we're assuming that she would die before us, but we don't know. We don't know. So I've also said, when I die, I would like to have my ashes pressed into pencils, even though nobody uses pencils or pens anymore, in kind of a remembrance of my love and joy, which has always been writing.
Well, thank you so much. This was a great discussion and a great service. I appreciate it. In lieu of a benediction, I have another song to share. And I was surprised that this recording is from our friends at the UU Church in Northfield, which is about a half hour south of here. And so here is Spirit of Life by the Northfield UU choir, or the congregation.